Great, hello. In this video, we're going to learn about semiotics, which is a type of analysis. And the really cool thing about semiotics is everything is up for grabs, which basically means you can analyze absolutely anything. It can be big, it can be small, it can be part of a major system, it can be stuck by itself. It is open and available to be analyzed. So it's really cool. It gives a lot of options for students to approach different topics. In terms of kind of a historical overview, semiotics came from a linguistic theory called structuralism, which is founded by Ferdinand de Saussure. So structuralism doesn't really get used by itself anymore, although many of its ideas have carried on into other fields. Theorists today use post-structuralism instead. So it kind of takes the ideas of structuralism, identifies the problems with its ideas, and kind of moves forward from there. Semiotics is one of the things that grew out of structuralism, and it's the study of signs and sign systems. So basically everything is a sign. If you have a word for it, it's a sign. And it's a sign, it's part of a signed system, which means you're looking at all the other signs that are kind of connected to things. So for example, later on, we're going to talk about sharks. A shark is a sign, and it's connected to a sign system that relates to ideas about similar animals. It could relate to the sound of the word shark. It can relate to our cultural feelings about sharks and how those have changed over time or not. Everything that's kind of connected to a shark is part of the sign system, and all of those things can be analyzed too, because in semiotics, everything is up for grabs. Semiotics often does its work through compare and contrast. So it might look at what something is based on what it's not. For example, if you wanted to explain what a dog is, it's a four-legged mammal that people keep as pets. But if you were explaining that to someone who'd never seen a dog before, they could get confused with cats. So all of a sudden, you have to start explaining what a dog is by explaining how it's not a cat. Right? We are comparing and contrasting with another similar animal to help strengthen the person's idea of what a dog is. Semiotics uses various contexts. So it could be linguistic, like what was the original meaning of the word? How has it changed over time? Did it come from another language at first? It could be historical. So did the sign that you're studying have an important place in history or in politics or in religion? Or how do people from different historical periods or political parties or religious affiliations understand that sign? So it's looking at these kind of cultural, symbolic meanings that get attached to it, right? So we're really digging in very closely to the signs that we're studying and looking at everything connected to them. So this part is a little difficult, and we're not going to use it for much, except to kind of keep in mind that when we talk about a sign, it's made up of two different pieces. The signifier, which is the word, in this case, shark. For us in English, that's how we pronounce the word, right? Shark. The symbols on the screen are how we signify the word when it is written down. If we were speaking another language, we would be using different symbols. We would be using maybe different letters, maybe completely different alphabet to get across the same idea, which is the signified, right? The actual shark itself is the thing that's being signified. So these two things exist as two halves of a whole, and this whole blue oval here is the sign. But they are connected closely together, right? The sound shark and the animal that's pictured here are a sign that's connected together for us, at least for English speakers, right? For other speakers, there would be a different, like speakers of other languages would have a different signifier. And signs exist in sign systems, so we would look at their connections to other signs. The other things that are closely related to sharks, like other big predators, for example. So why is this important? When we're doing a semiotic analysis, we can analyze the word itself, the signifier. We can analyze the concept, the signified, or we can analyze any of the underlying symbolic meanings that get attached to it. So if we were analyzing the word shark, We might look up the history. Why do we make that particular sound when we're talking about that animal? Does the original word come from German? Does it come from French? Does it come from Latin? Is it something that's Anglo-Saxon? Right? We're looking at the word itself. If we're analyzing the signified, we might think about the value that gets attached to sharks. What do we think about when we think of sharks? In most cases, we think that they're going to attack us, right? They're predators, they're scary, they're dangerous. We have all of these values attached to the shark. And then we can consider any other underlying symbolic meanings that have to do with the shark. How it's been used in films, for example, is a symbolic kind of connotation that we would look at. So another key idea about semiotics is that language shapes our understanding of the world. So a semiotician will say that we only understand things, we only interact with our world through our words, through our language. And so because of that interaction, the language we speak has a fundamental role in how we see the world around us. So a language can introduce new words, new terms to explain concepts. So for many years, there was no term sexual harassment, right? If women were in the workplace and they were experiencing sexual harassment, they would just think that their coworkers were behaving badly or making them feel uncomfortable, or maybe pressuring them to be unfaithful. But eventually we got this word sexual harassment, so people had a name to put on the thing that was happening. And there was a time period when the definition wasn't clear to the whole public, and so there was a lot of discussion like, this happened at work, was that sexual harassment? That happened at work, was that sexual harassment? My boss just pointed out a hot woman to me, was that sexual harassment? So we had to kind of go through this period before we could really get a feel for what that concept means to us. And now that we kind of have it down, we can use that to understand what we're seeing in the world, right? We understand what sexual harassment is, so when we see it happen, we have a label to put on it. Also, this concern about language and language shaping our world explains why people are so concerned about political correctness and using the right terms for people, and why certain terms change over time. So the example I put here is to use Inuit instead of Eskimo. And the term Eskimo is problematic first because the Inuit people didn't choose it for themselves. It's not their name for themselves. It was one chosen by colonizers, and one that colonizers associate with the idea of eating raw meat, which they also associate with savagery. So when a person uses the word Eskimo, they're implying that this group of people are savages. We can understand why the Inuit people would find that problematic, right? No group of people wants to be considered a savage. So that's why they're so insistent, in many cases, that at least outsiders use the word Inuit for their groups rather than Eskimo, because that term is not the one that they picked for themselves. All of this is to say that the words we use for things matter. They're really important. And so when people get very heated and passionate about the words that are being used, it's because the words are shaping the world around them. And so they have great importance for those people. To kind of back those assertions up with some research, there was a study done of languages that gender objects. So in English, for example, a table doesn't have a gender. We just call it the table. But in Spanish, it's la mesa, which means it's feminine, right? Even though the table doesn't have any reproductive organs of any sort, a gender is put upon it. And so researchers found people who spoke German and people who spoke Spanish. And during their research, they were asking them in English, but these were their first languages, right? German or Spanish were their first language. And they asked them to describe a key. And the folks who spoke German, in which the word key is masculine, described keys as hard, heavy, jagged, metal, and useful, which are all kinds of words that seem pretty closely related to masculinity. Whereas in Spanish, where the word key is feminine, the Spanish speakers described keys as golden, intricate, little, lovely, and tiny. So because the speakers of these languages have, in their language, these objects are gendered, that gives them a lens through which to actually see the object, that carries through even if they're speaking another language and even if they're just looking at pictures. So in this case, their first language, either German or Spanish, shaped the way they saw this particular object in the world. In the next part of the video, we are going to take a look at different options for how we can analyze things using semiotics, now that we've covered some of the basics and the key ideas of semiotics. So I'll catch you in the next one.